Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Alan Hathaway. I am so glad you chose to join me this morning. This particular message is entitled, I'm So Happy. I thought about starting off this concept of relationships during the month of February with a message about our relationship with God. One of the most difficult things for us to determine is what exactly is happiness. Is happiness getting what you want? Is it living where you want? Is it doing what you want? We often confuse happiness and joy with euphoria and pleasure. While these are not mutually exclusive, they are not exactly the same thing. Euphoria is a temporary feeling of well-being. And an exaltation or an elevation of our mood. Pleasure is a feeling of enjoyment that again is temporary. Happiness is ultimately a sense of fulfillment, while joy results from having purpose and direction in circumstances. While pleasure and euphoria may accompany these particular things, they don't determine them. People may be joyful in very adverse circumstances, or they may be happy in the midst of very difficult labors. For Christians, our happiness and joy is determined by our relationship with God as our Father. A confidence that He has everything under control, and the ability that He has to do things. We don't often think of those things as being important to our sense of happiness as Christians, but it is central to our sense of happiness. Our relationship with God is the foundation of happiness in our lives. So it is not how much we have or how much we can obtain in life. It is our relationship with God. If you would like to join us this morning for service at Riverdale, our service begins at the Riverdale Community Church at 8:30 this morning, and our service in Garrison begins at 10:30. We'd love to have you come and be a part of either of these particular services. So when we've talked about happiness and we've talked about what it means in our lives, Psalm 146 talks about what it means to be happy in God and happy in that relationship. It talks about being hungry and thirsty and all those kinds of things going on in our lives. It talks about God's power to change creation and transform the world. We are thrilled as Christians to realize that we serve a God who is capable of transforming this world. In Romans chapter 5, in verse 11, we're told that we can rejoice because our relationship with God has been reconciled. That means that God is now no longer at enmity with us. Paul makes it very clear to us that we as people, as individuals, are actually enemies, as he calls us, of God. The reason for that is that within each of us there are two forces. We call those sin, and they are actually at the very heart of our sinful nature. The first of them is arrogance. It is the idea that I can make up my mind about anything I want to, and I am not accountable to anyone for my decisions or for my actions. The second part of the sinful nature is selfishness. It is that I want my way no matter what, and that's really what's at the very heart of selfishness. For us as Christians, as we look at what the Apostle Paul says to us about these issues, we understand that there is something terribly wrong with our world. Now, there are different explanations for why that has happened, but for us as Christians, there's a very clear explanation for why it happens. Some people believe that, well, God could just basically sort of say, ollie, ollie, oxen free, and everything's okay. He just forgives it by writ or by decision. There's a problem with that. It leaves us with two horrendous results. If God just says, okay, everybody's forgiven, nothing, no harm, no foul. The first problem is that creation then becomes ruled by arrogance and selfishness, because that's what is left if God just simply says, well, it really doesn't matter. I'll just let everybody be forgiven because of all of this. So selfishness and arrogance rule creation. We cannot even fathom the depths of the brutality that will happen if that were to be the rule for our universe. The second thing is that if God decided just to say, well, everything doesn't really matter, he would no longer be almighty. And if that were true, then he would no longer be able to control the universe. And it would spin out of control into chaos and would cease to exist, because God had surrendered his authority over the universe. That's one of the reasons why this idea that God just can magically forgive everything without holding some type of accountability is destructive. In Romans chapter 5, verse 8, it tells us that God demonstrates his love toward us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So the concept is that the only thing that brings these two very different things together in our universe is the atonement sacrifice of Jesus Christ. It is the only thing that solves this problem. What seems simple is, well, God just forgives everything without requiring anything. Well, that decision would not be in our best interest. It would not be in your best interest or in my best interest. His only other option would be, or would have been, to exterminate humanity from his creation. God loved humanity too much to do that. He cared about us so much that he was willing to redeem us. The early Christians intuitively understood this. They started a process called creedal development beginning in the 2nd century. It actually begins in the New Testament. We see the beginnings of it there. But they felt like they needed a list of reasons for their faith. One of the earliest forms of this was what was called the Old Roman symbol. It is believed that it probably goes back to the middle of the 2nd century, at least the basics of it. It forms the very basis of the Apostles' Creed. What's interesting is the first statement in it is the same as our Apostles' Creed, with the exception of one phrase. The first phrase says, I believe in God the Father. And then it says, I believe in God the Father Almighty. The phrase that was added sometime probably during the 2nd century is, Creator of heaven and earth. Those statements tell us something very important about God and about our relationship with him. Number one, he is our Father. Number two, he has the power to do what needs to be done in our lives. And number three, he made us and he understands how to fix us. As Christians, we know that something seriously has gone wrong in our world. A lot of people would like to say it's society or it's other problems. During the time of the 2nd century, a group of people thought they knew why our world had gone wrong. They believed it was the fault of the God of the Old Testament. These people were called Gnostics. They believed that the God of the Old Testament was actually an emanation, or what's called a demerge, and he kind of came out of God, the creator of the spiritual world, and he tried to imitate this higher God that created the spiritual world and tried to create his own world, and that happened to be the world of the material, and that world is all twisted up and mixed up and terrifying, and it trapped all these little particles of God that became human beings, and that's how human beings came into existence. We're little sparks of the divine that are trapped in material, and that is the result of this terrible Old Testament God who was trying to imitate the God of eternity. And that's kind of the basics of the Gnostic views, and it varied a little bit here and there, but that's kind of the gist of their thinking. Christians were frustrated by this Gnostic teaching. It was attracted to the Christian church because of the strong views of God and his authority, but they just didn't quite like the God of the Old Testament, so they tried to push him out of the Christian faith. What the Apostles' Creed says is that we are committed to the God of the Old Testament. He is God. He is the God who created everything. He created the heavens, or the spiritual realms. He also created the material world, and he created all of this, and in the process, he created humanity. What went wrong with humanity is not this terrible, misshapen God of the Old Testament. The problem with humanity is that humanity sinned, and it followed its selfish desires, and it followed its arrogance, and created all these problems in human culture and human relationships, and created all these problems actually in the universe, because Paul tells us that God subjected the universe to decay in order that he might save humanity. All of that is part of the power and the wonder of God's desire to save us. But when the Jewish people look at God, they don't really see God the Father. They think of him, when they use the term God the Father, it's sort of a metaphor for God the Creator. It really doesn't mean a close personal relationship. When Jesus came, he called Christians to call God Father. The Apostle Paul lets us know that when Jesus used this term, he was using an Aramaic term, Abba. Abba would translate into English very well as dad. It is a very close personal term of relationship. This idea that God is our dad or our father in a close personal sense, it is a revolutionary concept. No other monotheistic religion has that understanding of God as a close personal relationship. Jesus told us that we were brought into relationship with God through him. The Apostle Paul tells us that we are brought into relationship with God as our Father because of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the cross. In that sacrifice, he provided for us reconciliation with God, so that the justice of God could be satisfied without damaging his almighty character. In order for him to be almighty and in control, his justice had to be satisfied. But he also loved us and cared about us. Because of that, we have entered into a relationship, an adopted relationship with God as our Father. That really transforms everything for us as Christians. It means that we have a unique and special and wonderful relationship with God. The fact that God is almighty, as the Creed states, is a promise to us that God has the power to deal with our failure and sin. He has the ability to deal with our arrogance if we will turn it over to him. He has the ability to deal with our selfishness if we will turn it over to him. So God has the power to deal with those things. But because he is creator, he understands us from the inside out. He knows our frame, as the writers of the Old Testament say. He knows how we're put together. And so he has the ability to fix us. He knows how this human being works. For the Gnostics, they believed that the only way to get fixed was to get out of our humanity. But for Christians, the glory is that our humanity is something God loves and desires to save. He desires to save us as whole human beings. It's part of what it means for him to be our Father. He loves us as we are. And that's why Jesus Christ came into the world, to save humanity and to save each of us individually. The catch is that we have to want to be saved. And that means that we have to admit that we are arrogant and that we are selfish. And because of that, we are in rebellion against God. And we need his forgiveness, and we need to accept the sacrifice that he provided in Jesus Christ. That sacrifice that satisfies his justice so that he can remain almighty and in control, and he can save us. And that is the wonderful, wonderful truth of the gospel. Jesus Christ came to save us so that we could have a reconciliation with God and a relationship with God that is a relationship of children to a father. He's adopted us. If you are a Christian, you're adopted by God. Doesn't mean everything's perfect, but it is a good reason for you to be happy. It's a good reason for you to be joyful because you have purpose and meaning in life. You have direction, and God is your Father. God bless you. Have a great day.